All right, today we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations by factoring. And what's important here is we're solving. Before we were just talking about factoring, but now we're actually solving. So we can solve these because the zero product property says if A times B equals 0, then A is 0 or B is 0. So one of those have to be 0. So what we're going to do is when we solve the equation, notice you actually have an equal sign here, so we need to figure the solutions for this. So first thing is we need to set the equation equal to 0. So you have to move everything to one side first. So here I subtracted 3, and that's where that -3 came in. Now it's set equal to 0, so now we can start. So you're going to factor the polynomial. Now again, you could either list GCF or you could do AC and B listed. You could do the X way here. It doesn't matter as long as you're solving it. So you're going to do A times C, which is 4 times -3, which will give you -12. And B is +1. So now that you've got +1, you can get +1 that multiply to -3 by doing 4, or excuse me, to 12, -12, sorry. You can do 4 and -3 will give you a +1, and it gives you a -12. So split that up, and then now we're going to start grouping. So these two will go here, and these two will go here. And now let's factor this out. We've got 4. I'll zoom in a little bit more. I've got 4x for both of here, and then what's left over is x plus 1. All right, now here we're factoring out, we've got our -3, so because those all have in common, so I'm factoring that out. So I've got a 3, and then what's left over is x, and don't forget we factored out that negative, so now we have a +1, and we're going to make sure all that's equal to 0. And then if you remember, I factored this, and then that's where these terms come into play. And then we said the rest is whatever's inside your parentheses. All right, so now we've got everything set equal to 0. So here's your step. Once you factor everything, now we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So we said over here, this is right here, and we're going to equal that to 0. We're also going to do this, and we're going to equal that to 0. So you're splitting it apart to find the two different ways. So if you were to do 4x minus 3 equals 0, you would have to add 3 to both sides, and then so you would get 4x equals 3, and divide both sides by 4. That simplifies to 1. So that's 1. And then over here, you just subtract 1. So you'll get x equals -1. So these are your two solutions. Oops. For that. So let's go ahead. First one's pretty straightforward. It's already factored for you. So you've just got to go ahead and go 4x plus 1 equals 0. And 3x minus 2 equals 0. Divide both sides by 4, because remember you want to get x by itself. All right, so this is one solution. And then the other solution and those are your answers. That's it. All right, so now for number 2, here, the only thing we can do is just factor out a GCF. So the greatest common factor is actually x. So we're going to factor out x, and then whatever is left over stays inside the parentheses. Now, since we're solving this, we're going to take each part and we're going to equal them to 0. So my first part is x equals 0. Well, that's an answer right there. All right, the next part, we're going to go x plus 3 equals 0, subtract 3, x equals negative 3. So this is your other solution. All right, set them both equal to 0. All right, for number 3, this one you have to factor first. So factor. And in this case, you need to think, well, the a is 1, so 1 times 6 is 6. So a times c equals 6, and b equals 5. So you need to figure out, there's no GCF, so we just have to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the b into 3 and 2. And then bring down the rest. And I put 2x on the side with the 6 because they're both even, so I can at least factor that out. But you should get the same thing inside parentheses no matter which way you choose. All right, and let's go ahead and let's start grouping them. So for x squared, if I were to factor out right here, I would factor out an x, and I'm left over with x plus 3. And then for here, I'm going to factor out a 2, and I'm left with x plus 3. And then now, notice you should have x plus 2 and x plus 3. Now you can set each one equal to 0. So go ahead, subtract 2. That's one solution. Subtract 3 to get x by itself. All right, so these are your solutions. All right, for number 4, I'm going to give you a hint. Your hint is to look for difference of squares. So, but first, you have to subtract 1 over here. So if you do this correctly, you should get 36. Oops. All right, now that you got that, now you can go ahead and do your difference of squares. One should be plus, the other should be minus. So go ahead, finish that, and you should get 2 solutions. And then for number 5, this one is a little more in depth. So there's no GCF. So let's do AC. And let's figure out B. So AC is negative 30. B is plus 13. And then now let's go ahead and you can factor this however you would like. I'm going to do 13 breaks up into 15 times negative 2 because 15 times negative 2 gives you negative 30, and bring down the rest. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's start grouping. So for these right here, I'm going to factor out a 5x. And I've got x plus 3. And then for here, I'm going to factor out a negative 2. And I'm going to get x plus 3. Remember, you should have the same thing in your parentheses. And of course, equal to 0. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to get 5x minus 2 and x plus 3 equals 0. Now set each one equal to 0. So this one should be negative 3 because you just moved that over. Here you're going to get 5x equals 2. Divide both sides by 5. So x equals 2/5. So your solutions are 2/5 and -3, or -3. All right, for this one, for number 6, your hint is to move everything to one side first. So you need to move 6x and move the 9. That's going to give you 0. You'll have 2x squared minus 3x minus 9 equals 0. Now you're going to go through and you're going to start factoring that. So do a times c, which is -18, to figure out what gives you that. So if you did this correctly, your answers for number 6 should be x equals -3/2 or x equals 3. So go ahead, I want you to finish the ones I did not do, so make sure you finish that one, and make sure you finish that one, and that is solving the quadratic equation by factoring.